Thank you so much for tuning back into Media One TV. We do have a special guest today, Steve Riddell. He is running for Texas House of Representatives, District 92.
Correct.
It's such a pleasure to have you here.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
So I recently saw that what invoked you to run for office was actually the 85th legislature. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 85th legislative session was in 2017, and at the time, I was walking my son through his merit badge for citizenship in the community, and one of the questions that he had to answer for that merit badge was what makes a difference between a citizen and a good citizen. And he thought about it and came back and he said, well, you know, Dad, I think it's this. A citizen just kind of exists. They just are. So a citizen is somebody that lives in a community and they obey the laws and they do the bare minimum of what they have to do. They pay their taxes, etc. But a good citizen is somebody that gives of themselves, that does more for the community, that does things that would benefit the community, maybe in ways that this good citizen doesn't even experience or get to experience themselves. I think that's what a good citizen is. He's a really smart kid, my son. I think he gets it from his mom. But so that happened on, I think it was a Tuesday, and then something like 2 days later, House Bill 21 was spiked in the Senate. So House Bill 21 was a bill that was going to make up for a lot of lost funding for public education students in the state of Texas. And that bill was going to go a little ways towards getting our public schools the funding that they needed, not all the way that we needed it to. And it was going to clean up some of the funding mechanisms that were a little antiquated and weren't making any sense. That bill was voted almost unanimously out of the Texas House of Representatives, the body that I'm seeking to join. And then when it got to the Texas Senate, our lieutenant governor basically killed the bill by taking most of the money out of it and adding a voucher program to the bill that most House of the representatives couldn't vote for. So these two things happening so closely together, the conversation about what makes a good citizen and that bill that was so necessary and that I, with 2 kids in public education myself, that I believe very strongly in, when those two things happened at the same time, it kind of felt like a sign to me, like this is something that I need to do. So that's when I started running, back in 2017.
So would you go as far as saying one of the primary focuses on this run that you're doing is going to be on, public finance reforms for public schools?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't know if you knew this, Francesca, but the mechanisms that they use for determining which communities contribute how much to the overall funding of public education in the state of Texas haven't been updated since the 80s.
Wow.
They haven't changed anything about them, and the state of Texas, especially this part of it, has changed a whole lot in the past 30 years. So those definitely need to be updated and repaired. At the same time, so the way funding works in the state of Texas is that up until about 10 years ago, our municipal taxes, like property taxes, would contribute about half of what public education needs, and then the state would come in and fill in the other half. So that's how it worked 10 years ago. But over the course of the past 10 years, the state has been drawing back its share of the funding to the point that now our municipal property taxes are funding over 60% of what public education needs, and the state is funding less than 40%. So, yeah, it is. At the same time, if you order all of the states in the United States in terms of how much they invest per public education student, the state of Texas, depending on who you ask, falls somewhere between 38th and 41st out of the 50 states. And we're getting the results from public education that you'd expect from that lack of investment because our students are getting out of high school, and I think the state of Texas is in the top 10 of the worst outcomes in terms of college readiness. So they're not ready to move on to the next level. And I think that's disastrous, both for the property tax reason, because now we have to pay more for property taxes the state is not paying, and also because we're kind of shorting our future here in the state because we're generating an entire generation of students that aren't prepared to be the workforce of tomorrow. And what major company is going to want to put down a headquarters here in the state of Texas if they can't be certain of having an educated workforce here?
Of course. And And one thing that we've noticed a lot in the mid-cities is actually there is a great immigrant population here.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
a blending pot.
Yes, it is.
And I do know you're actually, you do speak French as well.
Oui, un peu, un très petit peu. Oui. But yeah, I think that that's one of my favorite things about the mid-cities is the cultural diversity. So, you can go down the block and see a Thai restaurant that's being run by actual Thai people, and an African grocery store and a Korean grocery store. And I think that things that I like the most about the mid-cities is that, for the most part, we celebrate that diversity.
Yes.
We, for instance, at Euless Trinity High School, our biggest high school here in the mid-cities, at the beginning of every football game, the football team, which has a lot of Tongan people in it, they get up and they do the haka, which is the Tongan traditional dance, in front of the other football team, which does two terrific things. Number one, it emphasizes and embraces the cultural diversity of the student body of Euless Trinity, which is one of the most diverse high schools in the state of Texas. And the second thing that it does is it terrifies the other football team. So I think that, you're killing two birds with one stone there, and that's great. But as a businessman, one of the things that I've noticed is that if you have a really complicated problem to solve, if you have a need to solve a really sticky, intricate problem, and in a business, if you put together a bunch of people in a room to solve the problem that all think exactly the same way and have the same perspective, those people are going to come out of the room with the worst possible solution, because diversity is what creates great solutions. When you have a bunch of different people that anticipate different aspects of a problem because of their different experiences, because they come from different places and have different perspectives, you come up with much better solutions that way. So that's why I think that we as a community should embrace our diversity and celebrate it and think this is a fantastic thing. I don't understand why some people are afraid of it, but it has never made sense to me. It seems like having a diverse community is a blessing for us.
Yes. Well, with a diverse community does come legal issues such as undocumented labor.
Right.
Why do you think there's become such a need for undocumented labor?
Well, I think it's an economic problem, right? So most problems are economic problems in society, but one of the first things they teach you in economics class on like day one is the law of supply and demand, and a big component of that is that supply follows demand, and I think it's no different with undocumented workers. So that labor that they are supplying is being demanded from companies that are here in the United States. If you look at our history, the history of the United States or any other successful company or country in the history of the world, there's always that problem of a desperate need for low-cost labor, right? So we have always needed low-cost labor in this community, and we still do. Even the most conservative economic analyses of undocumented labor have shown that they're an integral and necessary part of the Texas economy. So I think we should be more honest about that. Just say, so look, if we are demanding this labor to come from south of the border or wherever it's being demanded, and it's coming over without following the rules of our community, which are important, we need to come up with a better way. I think our tendency to demonize the supply and not address the demand is leading to a very unequal solution, right? So right now, we're being a little dishonest with ourselves about the need to control that population that's coming to contribute to our economy, that are giving us necessary labor. And what I envision is something that actually acknowledges that people are coming to our country to work and they're contributing. Why not bring them out of the shadows and have them be a part of the community? We can tax the companies that need their labor, not as much as they would be taxed if they were, hiring legally, but we could have a guest worker program so that we could manage and control the population that's needing to come and that we need to come, and that I think is a much more honest solution.
Well, when the need for business and jobs do come in, a big issue we saw, at least in Denton, was with fracking. Can you tell us the importance of ordinance laws?
Yeah, so the fracking story in Denton is a really good one, and one that I think is a great illustration of how kind of the oil and gas industry here in the state of Texas is leading us to some very undemocratic solutions. So what happened is in the year 2014, the city of Denton, a lot of the residents of the city of Denton started noticing that there were unpleasant impacts to their lives because of the extreme amount of natural gas drilling that was occurring. Denton is ground zero for the Barnett Shale, which is one of the largest natural gas reservoirs in the world. So there were trucks going through all the time. The water was starting to taste funny. They were all of a sudden having earthquakes that they never had before. So some concerned citizens got together and they said, let's put a measure on the ballot for the municipal elections that says no natural gas drilling within the city limits of Denton. And so they got together and they got a petition signed and they did the democratic thing that you're supposed to do, and all organized and got together. Naturally, the natural gas industry came in very much opposed to this whole thing and poured a lot of money into trying to convince the residents of Denton to vote against it, but the measure narrowly passed. So this was in November of 2014 that the measure passed. And it didn't take long because almost immediately after, in the next legislative session that began in January of 2015, all of a sudden there was a bill that was HB 40 came through that said essentially no communities can make any laws whatsoever respecting the harvesting of natural gas or oil or any natural resources. So the idea that a community could come together and say, look, we're closest to this resource, we know best how to manage it, we want to have some local control over our own lives and resources, that the state would then come back and say, no, you can't do that because only the state is allowed to decide whether you can make any decisions whatsoever.
Denying their democratic
Yeah, denying them their democratic voice. And I think the justification they gave for that was that they didn't think it was fair to subject oil and gas companies to, I believe the phrase that the governor used was a patchwork of local regulations. And I think that any business, especially an oil company, which presumably has some cash, that isn't able to hire analysts to deal with a patchwork of local regulations probably doesn't need to be in business. I am a capitalist myself, and I believe very much in the power of capitalism to generate some of the best outcomes for everybody in a community. But at the same time, I don't think that the government should be 100% on the side of industry and not considering the other stakeholders in those equations.
Exactly. And Texas actually seems to be almost 100% involved with oil and gas. Recently, you've actually quoted that you feel Texas is actually putting all of its eggs in one basket when it comes to natural resources.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that, one of the things you learn as a businessman is that diversification reduces risk. So no person, even in the oil and gas industry, if you went to them and asked them to honestly answer the question, do you think oil and gas or carbon-based fuels are the fuels of the future? I think that most of them, if they were honest, would say no. So right now, the state of Texas is pretty much all in on oil and gas for energy production, but we have not sufficiently explored other means of generating electricity that could be explored, things like wind. So the state of Texas is actually the biggest wind producer in the United States, but there's a whole lot more that we could be doing there. I think we're probably one of the sunniest states in the United States, and we do very little with solar power. And I think that the innovations that have been occurring in solar energy generation with improving batteries have opened up a whole new frontier for us in energy production that we aren't sufficiently exploring because our politicians are a little too closely connected with the oil and gas industry. I think oil and gas is great and it's done wonderful things for the state, but I think having that diversification so that we are reducing our risk as a state in terms of energy production is a much wiser way to go.
I completely agree with that. So recently, actually, when you ran for office, it was a very close call. You did, pull in a good 28,000 votes.
Uh-huh.
And I am seeing on Facebook a lot of Mid-Cities users are actually saying that they didn't put up their signs and they're looking forward to you running in 2020. Is that true?
Yes, it is. So I am running again. We've spent, it would seem a shame after we spent so much time and effort building a great infrastructure for the campaign to just, let it go to waste. So I've had a lot of really positive feedback from the community saying, please run again. So I'm definitely in it to win it this time.
I definitely have a good feeling about this race.
Thank you.
And it's been such a pleasure having you.
It's been a pleasure being here.
You definitely have my vote.
Thanks so much.
Goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys.
Thank you.